What happens to our brain after death? Or maybe a more tangible question first. What happens in our brain while we are dying? Where do the stored informations of this complex hard drive go? These are questions that have interested people for centuries, and now there may finally be some answers. Neuroscientists have found that the brain of a dying person shows activity around the time of death that is similar to what happens during meditation, dreaming, or memory recall. The study, which was published in the journal Frontiers, apparently sheds light on a very mysterious property of the brain. It could explain that curious fast forward of life that people who have had a near-death experience talk about. Why and how this happens has been a mystery until now. The study now shows that the brain remains active during death and even afterwards, and orchestrates the whole process, so to speak. It all started when an 87-year-old patient with epilepsy was monitored using what is known as electroencephalography. This is used to measure and graphically display brain activity. While they were hoping to detect the seizures, the patient suffered a heart attack and passed away. But the recordings were running. What exactly happened to a dying person? We measured 900 seconds of brain activity around the time of death and focused on investigating what happened in the 30 seconds before and after cardiac arrest, said neurosurgeon Dr. Aymal Zemer, who organized the study. Shortly before and after the heart stopped beating, we saw changes in a specific band of neural oscillations, the so-called gamma oscillations, but also in others like delta, theta, alpha, and beta oscillations. These brain oscillations usually occur in living people during memory flashbacks or memory retrieval, meditation, dreaming, or concentration. Zemer suspects, looking at near-death accounts, that the brain plays a final memory of important life events just before death. The results continue to challenge our understanding of exactly when life ends and could even be of interest for organ donation. Even though this is the first time brain activity in a dying human has been measured, there have been similar results in rats. When it comes to any euphoria, it should be noted that these results come from a brain with seizures and injuries. Therefore, more tests were planned. It's incredible what else we will find out. Imagine seeing your whole life flash before your eyes in a second before you die. For what purpose does our brain do this? That's all that was measured in a single experiment. With our current technology to measure brain activity, who knows what's going on behind the scenes? In other words, what's happening beyond what can be measured? And now comes an interesting addendum to the last video. More specifically, it's about the statement that faith, when it comes to death, can only bring positive things for you. In the comments under the video, I read the term Pascal's wager twice. When I looked it up, I realized that it's basically the same insight discovered by the French mathematician and physicist Blaise Pascal in the 17th century. An insight is always more valuable when it is discovered by two independent people. Assuming that this logical reasoning comes from my own laboratory of thought, I read this theory with pleasure. But it cannot be ruled out that I read it at some earlier point and it became ingrained in my thinking. There is only one truth, but sometimes there are several paths that lead to it. The mind is extremely complex and may work differently for each person. But each one of them is still a mind. Do you remember Srinivasa Ramanujan, who developed mathematics in complete isolation with just 2 or 3 books? At this point, a thank you to the 2 people for the tip. Let's listen to that part again in the last video. Nowadays, disbelief is sold as scientific, modern, and reasonable, but purely logically, it always makes more sense to have a belief than not to have one. That's surprising, but that's the nature of death and faith. By believing in a religion, you have nothing to lose, because if that's not the case and nothing comes after death, you haven't lost anything, since the infinity of nothingness prevails. Everything you've experienced is no longer perceptible anyway, basically non-existent. The next case is, if you don't believe, it could be that life after death completely surprises you with what happens. Then there's the case where you believe in nothing and nothing happens. But then the same applies as in the first case. You can't relive what you've experienced anyway. Now, it can also happen that you believe in a certain outcome, and things turn out differently than you thought. That's a different topic altogether. This thought experiment aimed to demonstrate that generally, having faith doesn't lead to any drawbacks. What exactly does Blaise Pascal say about that? In his famous work, Pensée, published in 1770, you can find the argument. As I said before, it's an argument for believing in the existence of God. The expected value of the gain from believing is higher than the expected value in the case of not believing. Pascal says the following in these passages. So you say that we are unable to know whether there is a God? Logically, there are only 2 possibilities. Either he exists or he does not exist. There is no third possibility. Which opinion should you adopt? A bet must be made. Does he exist or not? It must. Important detail. It's not voluntary. Because we're all already in the game. Not betting automatically means betting that God doesn't exist. Then Pascal says, bet right away that he exists. Literally, the passage says, your reason will no longer be offended if you choose one or the other, because now a choice absolutely must be made. With this, one point is settled, but what about your salvation? Let's weigh gain and loss. You place your bet on faith. If you win everything. If you lose nothing. So believe if you can. According to him, you should believe in God unconditionally. Because there are the following 4 cases. If you believe in God and he exists, you will be rewarded. The second case is, you believe in God and God does not exist. In this case, you gain nothing, but you also lose nothing. You do not believe in God and God does not exist. In this case, you also gain nothing, but you also lose nothing. You do not believe in God and God exists. In this case, you will be punished. These 4 cases are very reminiscent of the last video. We also had the argument of having nothing to lose, expanded a bit with the infinity of death to illustrate the transience of life. Interestingly, the Pascalian wager, in the way it is presented, assumes that faith costs nothing. However, Pascal himself admits that one has to sacrifice earthly pleasures for faith. But what are these earthly pleasures worth? The last video was meant to show that basically they are worth nothing. Moments in life gain value when they shape the kind of eternity that might await you. This mindset could also benefit our interactions on earth, because faith doesn't have to cost you joy. On the contrary, it can even give you spiritual satisfaction, medical or socio-cultural benefits. because you free yourself from earthly pleasures, learning not to value them or chase after them. If you still get them, it's a nice bonus. You are at peace with death. Pascal's words regarding gain and loss were, "But here there is an infinite number of infinitely happy lives to be won, with equal probability of loss and gain, and what you stake is so little and of such short duration that it would be madness to withhold it on this occasion." No math is needed. A logical mind says the cost of belief doesn't exist as long as it's finite. As long as the probability of God's existence is greater than zero, there will always be an infinite expected value. Because any positive probability, when multiplied by infinity, results in infinity. This positive probability will always exist. Because disproving God, is that even possible? Is it even possible if the definition of God does not depend on space and time? We can develop, understand, and prove anything, but only as long as it exists in our reality and follows our laws. People can come to such interesting insights, but the question of which belief is the right one was left out. Nevertheless, it could perhaps be an incentive to engage with these interesting topics. Because it always gets really exciting when scientific findings like those from the first part of the video make us pause and think for a moment. No matter how brief these moments are. Sometimes a moment is worth an entire lifetime. And a lifetime might be an entire eternity.